Hello. This is a video case study where we're going to discuss the competitive advantage of Silicon Valley. If you haven't heard of Silicon Valley, this is the Santa Clara Valley in California, stretching from San Francisco down to San Jose. You can see on the map that this particular valley on the west side of the peninsula from San Francisco all the way down through Palo Alto, and the east side with Oakland all the way down to San Jose is one of the most vibrant and rich areas with an agglomeration of technology-based companies. All of the giants in the computer and technology industry are there. And so part of what motivates us as we look at this case is the question how to be Silicon Valley. What is the mixture of talent, the mixture of venture capital and finance, the great university or universities in this area, and the culture that helps create such a vibrant and successful area. And so it does beg a few further questions. How did it all happen? And if the question is how to be Silicon Valley, is it possible to be like Silicon Valley as you develop the competitiveness of any region around the country? And so if you look at this area, of course, dating back into the 1950s and 60s, and even before, around World War II, had developed a very strong military infrastructure like much of California. Because of the hilly locations in this particular part of California, a lot of telegraph technology developed there. In fact, a famous part of San Francisco is Telegraph Hill and Coit Tower. These are areas where a lot of the telegraphic technology began to develop in the communications industry, mostly through the military. Eventually, this translates right around the same time that San Francisco is sort of an epicenter of the 1960s counterculture. We think of the great entrepreneurs like Bill Gates and many of the others that we're going to talk about. But they really started sort of in the hippie culture that was part of San Francisco. And some of what you see is sort of this marriage between that culture and the telecommunications industry that was really based in that San Francisco and that Santa Clara Valley because of that military infrastructure and because of the topography that allowed that to take place. In the Moretti book, The New Geography of Jobs, there's a lot of discussions about the agglomeration effect and what those elements of economic development and the new geography of jobs. And so this geography is in some ways contributed to based on the things that we just mentioned. But the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan has a very famous quote in which he says, how do you build a competitive city or a competitive region? You build a great university and you wait 20 years. Stanford University is a very significant part of any element of the Silicon Valley story. From its early days, engineers, scientists, and much of the government corporate research funding really was based around Stanford. It's a relatively new university, founded in 1891, founded by former governor of California, Leland Stanford. Stanford was not only a politician, but made his money in the Central Pacific and Southern Railroads. And the bequest of 8,000 acres and in the area 35 miles south of San Francisco in Palo Alto, a lovely little city, this university campus was born. It was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, very famous from a place-based economic development context. Olmsted designed Central Park. He designed the Emerald Necklace of Boston. He also designed the park system in the city of Louisville. And so this beautiful campus became a centerpiece for advances and innovations as all this radio technology began to emerge. And so this early electronics and microprocessing industry really developed an engineering background that the university was pivotably involved with. Frederick Terman was one of these engineers, and he eventually became the provost, the number 2 at Stanford. He's often referred to as the father of Silicon Valley. His 2 most famous students, among many famous students, were William Hewitt and David Packard. They founded their first company in the Stanford Industrial Park, a bit of land today that was part of that 8,000 acres that was located in between San Jose and San Francisco. And so this became the Stanford Industrial Park, land owned by the university, and the Stanford Research Park, part of the university research infrastructure. Eventually, this research park became home to 150 companies, all of them leveraging engineering and electronics technology. And so this research park, you can see some of the companies that start there or grow there. They came to be pioneers, and of course, they were adventurers, but also community builders. And we talked about that culture, the counterculture, really, in San Francisco. Many of these founders were really involved in the Haight-Ashbury district and that counterculture in San Francisco, but also were involved in that electronics infrastructure. And so the people who came here were interacting with business and helping create business. And so you can see the list of companies more and more. And so let's talk about William Shockley. William Shockley became one of the great bits of engineering talent that came from Bell Labs. Prior to Silicon Valley, the center of engineering technology in the Silicon Valley of the United States in the pre-Silicon Valley days was in New Jersey. It was at Bell Labs. This was where transistor technology was a significant part of the development of the technology around that military infrastructure. Came to San Francisco mostly because all that was happening in and around the transistor and the communications technology of the telegraph. Shockley Semiconductor had 2 original employees that eventually would become part of the corporation that would be later known as Intel, which again becomes one of the most important technology-based companies in the world. And of course, you mix then the talent and the university research infrastructure along with that ecosystem of that culture, whether you want to call it counterculture or entrepreneurial culture, community culture, all of that mixed in with the growth of a very elaborate venture capital framework. After the growth of these companies around Stanford, you begin to see on Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park the development of these VC firms. Kleiner Perkins became the most well-known VC firm in the world, providing startup capital for companies like Hewlett-Packard, Intel, Apple, Google, Amazon, among others, all of which had really their genesis in the Stanford Research Park. And so the software companies, the semiconductors, they're still an important part of the business ecosystem there. And in recent years, the internet and the software that fueled the development of the computer, semiconductor, but also internet revolution really fueled the growth of the Valley. And so the Stanford Research Institute and Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center has really been involved with the development of Apple, Cisco, Adobe, Microsoft, and many, many other products that really form the basis of why Silicon Valley starts. And so you see this very intricate mixture of the culture, of the talent, of the university and the research infrastructure, the venture capital, and the location, along with the technology infrastructure. You can see Richard Florida's 3 T's being played very well. But the ultimate question, the question for us to ponder as we take this to class, is how to be Silicon Valley, and can other places be Silicon Valley? I look forward to the discussion.